Oh man, it's so good to have Caleb back. It's so good to have him around. Some of you may not know him, but Caleb and Kelsey, they were on staff here, as Joanne said, and dear people to us, and have since had their firstborn, Rudy. And I want to let you know Caleb will be around, so you can see him post service, but also tonight at 6:30 in H2, which is the building straight across. Caleb is going to be sharing some original music he wrote, but he's also going to be doing some storytelling, and also it's just an opportunity for you to kind of hear what's been going on in Germany and the ministry they're involved with. So if you want to hang out with Caleb tonight, 6:30 H2, you can do that. Along with that, we have some exciting stuff to talk about. One of those being Prescott Valley, and specifically February the 11th. So that's the Friday, okay? So February the 11th, Friday, we are doing a celebration night. And here's kind of the thought behind it. Here's kind of the invitation to you as church family. This is not something we're just opening up to everybody. It's a night of celebration for us as a family. If you have been a part, you've been on that journey, you have been, can't wait for Prescott Valley, and you know that as you've stepped into that, as you've been a part of it, you know that it's been sacrifice, it's been struggle, but the vision is that people would come, that they would encounter Jesus, that they would engage, and they would be empowered. If that's you and you've been on that journey, we want you to know February the 11th is for you. That if you're here and you're like, hey, maybe you're in this camp that I'm going to attend Prescott, but I would love to see Prescott Valley, February the 11th is for you. And what it's going to be is just a celebration. So it's going to start probably with an open house in the afternoon. We'll get you times on the exact times of that, but some form of open house where you can come in, you can tour the entire space, you can get to see it before it's open the next day. You can meet with different ministry leaders from those spaces, and they can kind of share the heart behind it. And then at 6:30, we're going to do a celebration. It'll be about 45 minutes, but it's geared towards, we're just going to celebrate in worship, in prayer, in vision, and just kind of rally together and kind of dedicate that space to the Lord before it's opened up the next day. So if you want to be a part of that, February the 11th is your day for that, for celebration. The 12th, then, the Saturday, is our first services in Prescott Valley. We can cheer, we can clap. It's been a long time coming. And if you've been here the last few weeks, football isn't giving us anything to cheer about. So, but February the 12th and 13th will be the first services. And another thing we need to let you know about is, because of this shift in growth for our family, we're at a point where we need to restructure our service times. And so here's how it's going to be. Here's what a weekend is going to look like from a service perspective. You're going to have Saturday in Prescott Valley. So you have Prescott Valley Saturday night, 5:30. That will be our first service of the weekend. There will not be one here. It will only be on our Prescott Valley location. Somebody's excited. We're not doing it here. That's good. Sunday in Prescott Valley, there will be a 10:30 service in the morning. On this location, there will be no service Saturday. Sunday, we will have 8:30 and 10:30 on this campus. We will also have online at 10 a.m. And so in a weekend, those 5 services will be what we step in with until we see what the Lord's up to and see where people are and how that all shakes out. It will be the same speaker that does all of those services on a weekend. And so for you, if you're deciding which one, Saturday night, 5:30, 10:30, Sunday morning, that's Prescott Valley. Prescott, 8:30, 10:30, and then online at 10 a.m. So that'll be our service structure moving forward. We'll get you more information on that. You'll be able to find that online. That'll be easily accessible and will make more sense. But we just wanted to make you aware, kind of as we're leaning in and growth is happening to our family, that as we step into that, there's some changes that we need to do and make. So the 11th celebration night, we would love to see you there. Love to celebrate that space. Love to get you in and let you walk around. Super exciting. The playground started to go in this week, and you guys. It's pretty amazing. So anyways, I can stay on Prescott Valley all day. We got to move forward. Before I do, you guys okay if I take care of a stain? Me and Coffee had a fight. Thanks, I think I'm good now. Okay, so if you've been with us, we are in a series called What If? And that series is geared around this idea, what if Jesus actually meant what he said? Like what if Jesus actually, when he tells us specific things, what if we took them to heart and we actually applied them in every form of life? How would we look different? How would you look different? How would our family represent Jesus differently? This idea of what if is kind of born out of this reality that pre-COVID, 21% decided that they've seen church, they've seen followers in churches and religion and gone, you know what, I'm better with no religion than looking like that. I'm better with no religion than experiencing what you've experienced. And I would say probably one of the things you find as you get into that and look at that is people are just going, hey, I've seen Jesus followers, and what I read about the words of Jesus and what I see in the lives of Jesus followers, I'm not sure they match up. In fact, so much so that I would prefer to not be like them. And that should, for us, if you're serious about your relationship with Jesus, you've crossed that finish line of faith, there's an element of that stings. It hurts. There's an element of that goes, okay, we've got to change that narrative. And so one of the ways that we're leaning in, just kind of starting out the year, is going, hey, what if Jesus meant it? What difference would that make? And today we're in a passage that honestly is, Jesus is being confrontational. In Matthew 23, there's a context. If you're familiar with the Gospels, what the Gospels are is it's people that walked alongside Jesus. They were eyewitnesses, and they capture for us a snapshot of Jesus' life. They're not extensive. They don't get every moment of his life, but they get these key moments that the Holy Spirit inspires them to capture for us. In Luke, we have the same words captured in a different setting. The setting in Luke, the context of these words is there is a meal being shared. They are gathered around a meal, and that's key as we get later in this passage. It's key to understand that the context that these words are spoken was probably over a meal as Luke captures it. And so with that in mind then, Jesus says, woe to you teachers, in verse 23, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. So Jesus is out here making friends. He's just easing his audience into it. You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. Okay, we gotta pause just to gain context and understand as we move through the passage. Why a tenth? Right? That's the first question that comes to mind. Why a tenth? And you gotta remember that the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the religion of the day, they were still holding to what had been given to them through Moses and through the law. And so for them, they're stepping in with specific guidelines of what life should look like. If you are a follower of God as a Jew in this setting at this time, there were specific things you held to that had to do with your personal holiness, had to do with you living out right before God, had to do with you holding the law and not breaking it. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 14, Deuteronomy 14, it says this about the tenth in verse 22. Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, new wine, and olive oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. So this is saying, and if you fast forward, there's a temple, and the temple was believed to be where God's presence was. And so God's presence is in the temple. This is saying take a tenth take a tenth of the things mentioned, and you are going to go and eat them in the presence of God. Now, why is this significant? Because for us as humans, we need to eat. There's some point today where your body will go, hey, I am hungry, and maybe it's already happened. Maybe you already had that this morning. Those of you that are early risers, you're probably ready for lunch, right? But your body goes, hey, I'm ready to eat. You need to put food into me. Food is central to life. What food also is it's a reminder. We need food to survive. And in this context specifically, God is providing a harvest. They're taking that harvest, and as they go into the presence of God, what they're being reminded of is God's goodness, that all of life is a gift. All of life is sustained by God. And now through food, I'm reminded I am dependent on God, and God is my provider. And so what food did, it was central to their understanding and their remembrance of who God was. So much so that at the end of that verse, it says, so that you may, so why go into the presence? Why take a tenth? Why eat it? So that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. That word revere is a positive. It's the idea of capturing awe. It's the idea of wonder. It's the idea of reverence toward God for who he is. And so what's given to them is, hey, you're going to take a tenth. And as you take this tenth, it's a personal sacrifice. You're going to go and eat it in front of the Lord. Now, back to Matthew, Jesus is telling them, you give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. Now, in the original context we just read, there was no capture of, hey, give your spices. But in their context, as teachers of the law, they were redefining the law. And there was this thing called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah, if God's law had 613, it's believed that the Mishnah had 1,500 laws. And what they did with the Mishnah, if you imagine it this way, if the law of God is here and we don't want to break that, the Mishnah put a fence around the entire law. So they made more laws and they broke it down even further so that you stayed way away from the actual law God had given. That way, it was guaranteed that you would have personal holiness. When they are dividing up their spices, which this is a great illustration for all of you at the very back, but it kind of makes the point of they're taking their spices and they're measuring out a tenth. Maybe a little more. What Jesus wants you to capture is they are meticulous. They care so much about their personal holiness. They care so much about not breaking God's law that they are measuring down to almost fine dust. They are picking mint off of plants and counting out a tenth because they care so much about being right before God. They care so much about their personal care before God. Why? Because as Jews, they were occupied. And as an occupied people with Rome there, they believe we're occupied because we have upset God. Because we've upset God, that's why Rome's here. So we need to take care of our personal holiness so that God shows up and does what God's supposed to do. So we're going to go the extra mile to make up for all those other people that aren't doing it. And so they're now before, and what's being commended here is, hey, you're so meticulous. You are counting your spices. God is commending them. Well done. You are holding your personal holiness to a standard. But then he says this, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So what is justice in this context? The word justice carries with it this idea that there are basic human needs that every human has. That you have today, if we were to take this room and we were to divide this room up and we were to go, okay, we want you to make a list of basic human needs that you say you need to have. It would probably include things like shelter. It would include things like water. It would include things like food and resources. It would include things probably like a job, right? There are certain things that we would say, absolutely, these are the things that are essential to life. What's being said here within justice is that when those things are not provided, there is an injustice that takes place. And so when he talks about justice, he's talking about that there is a way that God intended for this to work, where we love our neighbors more than ourselves, right? Where we have an obligation to those around us, that we are going to care for, we are going to look after, we are going to make sure that everybody has what they need. And so the reality in this case, when he's talking about justice, he's going, the world as God wants it to be. He's saying you've neglected bringing that to be. As God's people, as the physical representation of God, you have missed the point, and you have been neglecting this thing called justice. We have some examples of this from Scripture. In Malachi 3:5, they're calling for, where is the God of justice? And so God then answers, and this is some of the examples of where he would go, hey, this is an injustice. So I will come to you, I will come to put you on trial. I will be quick to testify against sorcerers, adulterers, perjurers, and against those who defraud laborers of their wages, who oppress widows and the fatherless, and deprive the foreigners among you of justice. But do not fear me, says the Lord Almighty. Sorcerers, those that are actively against the things of God, are manipulating ways to get what they want. Adulterers, those that would be unfaithful. Perjurers, the liars. Those who defraud laborers of their wages. The idea of, to God, an injustice is that somebody has worked for something and they are paid under what the value of that work is. In our cultural context, fair trade would be a part of that. Who oppress widows and the fatherless. Who are setting up systems that work against widows, who are engaged in a system where widows are not being taken care of, which therefore mean they're neglected, which therefore mean they're oppressed. To God, that is an injustice. Orphans, the fatherless, that any oppression, any system that leaves children uncared for and abandoned, that God goes, this is an injustice. That foreigners, deprive foreigners among you of justice. Remember, justice in the case of as God intended it to be, where human needs are met, where we have this standard of loving your neighbor as yourself. He says, hey, when you deprive that of a foreigner, that's an injustice. And these are examples of justice. And so then in Matthew, when he says that you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, then we have to ask, what is it in our context that then when we talk about justice, where are we missing this idea of justice? Because what he's saying here is, hey, you're counting your spices, but you're neglecting things like justice. And then he talks about mercy. The idea behind mercy is that it's an active pity. That it's a compassion, that it's I move to action, that I see what's in front of me and I cannot do anything else other than step in. And as I step in, I'm taking this feeling, this compassion that I have, and it's moving me to action on your behalf. Examples of this would be in Matthew 6. We've been in Matthew 5 for the last few weeks. We were talking about salt and light last week. And then in chapter 6, it switches to kind of this personal, where salt and light is outward, it turns into this personal holiness idea. And he begins to talk about this idea of practicing your acts of righteousness. That practicing your acts of righteousness, the way that plays out is, he says, the very next verse is, when you give to the needy. That is the same framework of this word mercy. That in Jesus's context, when he's talking about mercy, it's you looking at somebody else and providing for the needs that they have. It's you looking at somebody else and being so moved with compassion, so moved with pity, that you do something actively about it. Another example is in Acts chapter 3. Peter and John are going towards the temple. As they're going towards the temple, they come to this gate called Beautiful. And there's a lame person that's been lame from birth that gets carried and placed at the temple gate. And it says specifically that person is put there to beg from the other, from anyone walking by. That word beg is the idea that you are playing on the mercy of others. That you are essentially, by that word beg, is that you are actually looking at people walking in to go to church in those days, the temple. And as they are going into church, you are looking at them and going, will you have active pity on me? Will you have compassion for the state that I'm in? And that's what he's saying here with the word mercy. Faithfulness is this idea of reliability. Faithfulness is this idea of you're genuine, that wherever you found, you're going to be. And so in this case, he's talking to what are the people of God, which in our context would be the church. And he's saying, listen, you need to be the people of God wherever you're found. Whatever you're doing, you are to be the people of God. And what he's saying here is you've neglected being genuine and reliable. You've neglected, and the word that we have in our translation is faithfulness. So what is he saying? You give 1/10 of your spices, your mint, dill, and cumin. So you give 1/10. Your personal holiness is meticulous. You are so rigid, and you are so aware, and you are so engaged when it comes to your personal holiness. But you have neglected, and in Jesus' words, not mine. Remember, what if? What if Jesus really means it, right? You have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And then he says this, you, so Jesus, God himself speaking, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. I don't know about you, but latter and former, it always messes with my brain, right? You should have practiced the latter being justice, mercy, faithfulness, without neglecting the what? The personal holiness. You want to capture this whole message in one word, what Jesus is saying, what if he really meant it? Do both. Do both. What does he mean? Oh, your personal holiness matters. Your personal holiness matters. What do I mean by that? The things that you let into your mind matter. The things that you fixate on matter. The things that you engage in from a mental perspective, they matter. The words that come out of your mouth, it matters. The language you use, it matters. The gossip you spew matters. Like personal holiness matters to God. The things that you put into your body, maybe drugs that you use, they matter. Right? The way you use your hands, the stealing matters, the cheating matters, the getting ahead at somebody else's expense matters, right? The idea of your phone usage and how you use your phone and the websites you engage on, it matters. The way that you take care of your own forgiveness of other people matters. The jealousy that you haven't dealt with, it matters. Right? All of this matters. The alcohol you consume matters. The greed that you have, the gluttony, it matters. Right? God is not saying in any way, shape, or form. Jesus is not getting at that who you sleep with doesn't matter. Who you sleep with matters a lot. The way you carry your sexuality matters. Jesus is saying that your personal holiness matters. But if that's all that matters, you've completely missed the point. If all your spirituality is about your own personal holiness, if all my spirituality is about me and God, I have missed. Why? Because what he's saying is, and these are Jesus's words, you have missed the most important part of justice and mercy and faithfulness. I wonder if a world looking on at the church, and I'm saying Big C church, I wonder if the world looking on at the church is because they don't see a whole lot of justice. And by justice, I mean that we care about the things that God cares about. We get hung up on all kinds of things that aren't godly, and we claim them to be godly. But if we just break it down today to basic human needs, I was in a meeting this week, and you guys, 25 children a day in Arizona go into care. They are removed from their homes and they go into care by the state. 25 children a day in Arizona. I don't know what that does for you, but I'm sitting there and I'm going, that's not okay. That's not okay. There is no form of this that's okay. You know why? Because where we're busy fighting these huge battles over here, what's happening in our own backyard is kids are being removed. And when they're removed, there's not enough homes now. And they're going into these group homes that we know based on statistics are not good for them. We know that they will struggle. We know that the family units will break down. If the family unit breaks down, so does your Christianity. And God looks on and he goes, church, it's a matter of justice and of mercy. That we have people that have food insecurity in our own backyards. That's not okay. One of the greatest tensions we have with Prescott Valley is this, that we want to love families well. We want to create a space where they come in and it's safe for their kids to play. You know, the tension is we also want the homeless man to feel like he belongs. That's a tension. But here's what Jesus is saying. If all church is for me, is I come here and man, I feel good. I get my worship on. I feel closer to Jesus. I go home, I'm inspired. I wake up tomorrow morning and I have my quiet time with Jesus and I have my prayer time with Jesus. And I go to my life group and we huddle up and it's all Christians and we have our good time. And I feel real good. And I feel real close to God. If that is all your Christianity is, what if Jesus meant it that you've missed the bigger point? It's not about, man, there's a part of it that's personal holiness. But it really, really, really matters how that plays out into the rest of the world. Jesus' words, not mine. You have neglected the more important matters. And then he sums it up with this, verse 24, you blind guides. He's just being friendly again. You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. That might be some of the best preaching you've ever heard in your life. You strain out a gnat. Remember, it was a table context. And in a table context, what would happen is you would have something to drink out of. And you were probably drinking wine, right? And on the top of it, there was a strainer. Why a strainer? Because remember, they follow the law meticulously. And part of the law says, because of kosher and everything else and all the eating rituals that they had about staying clean, what the law says is if there's a four-legged animal that flies, that it's unclean for you to be in contact and eat it. And so what would happen is you had open liquids and there were gnats. And the gnats were there and they would come and they would land in your wine, which we would just go gross, right? But for them, it was a religious, wait a minute, I've got a gnat in my, that's not okay. That makes me unclean. So they would put a strainer on it and you would take the strainer off, take a drink, put the strainer back on, pour the wine over the strainer, make sure that everything was clean and make sure that you strained out all the gnats. Also in Leviticus chapter 11, it talks about these things called camels. And that camels are unclean to eat, which we're all like, yeah, you ever been around a camel? That's pretty obvious. But camels are unclean to eat. Jesus goes, hey, you're straining out the gnat while eating a camel. Because you've held a standard of personal holiness, and that hasn't made any difference in the areas of justice and active compassion and how you care for the world. I mean, it's kind of like taking out a stain stick. I'm good. And y'all are going, bro, you got a giant stain on the other side. I don't know where this hits you today, but for me, this hits hard. It hits hard. Because we get caught up in so many things that just don't matter. We get caught up fighting battles that God's not on the side of, y'all. He's not. And meanwhile, in our own backyard, we got people who financially aren't even making it while others have more than enough. We got people that are essentially starving in our own backyards while the supermarkets are full. We got kids being moved out of homes quicker than we can put them in homes. That's all in our backyard. Let alone, do I actually care because I'm connected? Where I buy my clothes matter. What that person's paid according to Jesus matters. And am I an advocate? Because he says, don't neglect the more important things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And those are all away. Those are all outward. I want to be very, very clear. He is saying do both. Your spiritual habits, your walk with Jesus matters. But y'all don't miss the other piece. Because according to Jesus, the more important. And so we're going to spend some time just around the table. You should receive communion on your way in. And what you hold in your hand is a representation. What is it a representation of? The Jesus who is both for you. What do I mean by that? So if we put it in the context of this idea of justice and mercy, that Jesus was so moved with compassion that he was willing to empty himself of glory. He was willing to empty himself of everything that he could have laid claim to show up. Why? Because he looks at us as humans and he goes, it's not okay. This sin is ripping them apart. And a basic human need is to be connected to its maker. And so Jesus shows up. And when he shows up, it's this crazy story that he set up, that in the death of someone else, there can be life for others. In the death of someone else, there can be reconciliation of others. In the death of somebody else, there can be justification for others. That you can be made right with God because, and so what we find in Jesus is we find the perfect balance. That he had his relationship with God. You see it. He gets away in the morning. He spends time with his Father. You see him going to the synagogue on a weekend. You see him with his group of people and they're talking about spiritual things. But then you see this compassion and this active pity, and you see this justice everywhere he goes. And the ultimate picture of that is the cross when he gets there. That you would be made right with God. Because it's the need we had. It's the need humanity has. And so he gathered people around the table, and he's going to use two elements, bread and wine, to connect it all for them. And so we're going to give you just a few moments just for yourself to reflect. God, where am I? Where am I? What if I've been missing the point the whole time? God, where am I missing applying this gospel? Maybe it's on a personal level. Maybe you need to care more about the personal. Maybe you've been neglecting it and it matters. It matters to God. But just maybe there's a sense of you need to evaluate, God, where have I missed justice and mercy, compassion that moves me, and where have I not been reliable? So the next moments are yours to reflect with God. On the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, ordinary bread, and with his friends gathered around, he connected the bread to this idea of God showing up in physical form and giving up his body, a willful choice. Why? So that the needs that we have as humans, this reconciliation, this gap that divides us between God, this thing called sin, could be removed. And he began to tell him, my body's going to be given up and I'm going to hand it over for you. He goes, don't forget. So when you gather, take this thing called bread, just ordinary wafer in our context. And he handed it to them. He said, take, eat, do this in remembrance of me. He took a cup, a glass of wine. This represents the change for all time. That you will never have to worry about, are you forgiven? That in Jesus, forgiveness was abundant. Forgiveness was for all, and it would be purchased by his blood. That you would be made right before God because his blood would make you right before God. Why? Because you would be forgiven. And so he took the cup and he reminded those at the table, and then he said, take, drink, do this in remembrance of me. God, we come before you this morning. God, and we thank you. We thank you for being a God who is the physical representation of the tension. God, you displayed to us what it's like for every part of our life to matter. You displayed for us what it's like to have a personal walk, an intimate walk with you as Father. And yet, God, in the ultimate display of love and compassion that moves, mercy and justice, providing for the needs of humanity. God, you went to a cross and you rose 3 days later, and we're just thankful. Thank you for rescuing us. Thank you for saving us. God, in these next moments as we stand and we get to sing together and we get to remind ourselves, God, that you will never let us down. We have the cross to prove that. And God, above all, we have this overwhelming abundance of your goodness that has been given to us because, God, you are good. And so thank you for good gifts this morning. Thank you for reminders. Thank you for calling us to love well. We are so grateful that you loved us first, and everybody said, amen. Church, would you stand? We're going to worship together this morning.